And so good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are in whichever time zones. So welcome to this webinar, jointly organized by the Commonwealth Secretariat and the Digital Agri Hub, based at the University of Wageningen, and in collaboration with AGRA, Farmerline, and GIZ, DIASCA program. DIASCA stands for Digital Integration of Agricultural Supply Chains Alliance. So this actually is the second webinar we are organizing. We launched the series of webinars last week, and we are doing this every Friday for the next 4 weeks. So last week it was more about introducing the series and also introducing the conversations about digital public infrastructure. Now, let's see if I can. Okay, that's fine. I think I'm not seeing the chat. I should just see the chat and open it up separately. Good. All right. Yeah. So again, welcome to everyone. We're just giving ourselves a bit more time, so we have people joining in just past the hour. So maybe if I can just have the next slide in there, we'll just start with the little notes, the logistics. Usually, if there are not too many people, we allow the videos to be on. But in this case, well, because it's a large group, we've automatically put off the microphone and the videos. But by all means, you have access to the chat to be able to reach out to people and introduce yourselves and engage in the conversations and comments and questions. Ideally, we would want you to put the questions in the Q&A section, which you can see there's an icon at the top of your screen. But if you don't, we can still go with the questions in the chat. But we will also have the function where you can raise your hand to ask questions as soon as each of the speakers have finished their presentations. We're trying to be more interactive this week. So in that sense, we will also then try to keep the presentations from the speakers as short as possible, and then we'll go through. I see Ben has his head up. Did you want to say something before we start, Ben?
Yes. The video, I think we will enable video. People who want to show their faces, we would like to see your faces if your video is available. But as Christian said, for the audio, until you are ready to ask questions, you raise your hand and it's approved, then that will be enabled. So I think we'll be able to enable your videos if you want to show your faces. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Ben. All right, so let's get started. And I'll just, the first slide will just be about a reminder that as we said, we started the series last week. And this series of webinars is being organized in the context of the launching of a policy guide by the Commonwealth, which will take place on the 23rd of October. But what we wanted to do is initially to engage with the audience in terms of the general aspects of DPI, and then focusing a lot on how DPI becomes applicable in the field of agriculture. So last week, the key message we had was, definitions of digital public infrastructure. And here we have at the top the definition used by the World Bank in a document released earlier this year in March. And at the bottom you see the kind of the principle of what DPI is supposed to be resolving. That we have traditionally seen a lot of siloed approaches to digitalization, lots of data or databases and systems not talking to each other. But by introducing this concept of a digital public infrastructure, we are able to then create the common infrastructure whereby we can all share information and share data with each other. And what we've been told is that this opens up a whole lot of opportunities for collaboration. So today we'll be looking at some of these functionalities that we are able to do when we have a DPI in place, namely in terms of the facilitating data exchange. And therefore we've got our speakers lined up today. And we'll probably get started with our first speaker, Vinit Bhandari from the CDPI, Center for Digital Public Infrastructure. So Vinit is, sorry, let me just say that CDPI has been one of the key partners with to the Commonwealth Secretariat in the organization of the national dialogues we had on this conceptualization of DPI in agriculture, and especially developing this concept of a national agricultural data infrastructure. So we were quite grateful to the staff of CDPI who, introduced our audience to the concepts of DPI before we took the discussions into how does it apply in the field of agriculture. So today we've got Vinit with us, who is the country leader and programs leader. So I think he's got a lot of responsibility around and overseeing the implementation of DPI in different countries. But he's also working on the concept of packaging DPIs so that it's a more packaged offer to the different countries they're supporting. So Vinit, I'll leave it to you then.
Thank you, Krishnan, and hey everyone. Excited to be here and share some lessons or learnings from our work across the world with countries and helping them build DPI systems. If you can just flip to the next page, you will see that just a quick intro of who we are as an organization. We are set up as an academic and a non-profit, and our only job is to provide pro bono DPI technical advisory to countries. So if there's anyone in the world who wants to build DPI systems, any governments in the world wanting to build DPI systems, we offer no cost, sort of technology neutral, software neutral advice. We have no agenda, we have no software to sell, but really we are a team of builders. On the next slide, I think just a quick recap. I know Krishnan said that some of you may already be familiar with this, but again, that's the way we, Krishnan shared the DPI definition. The way we think of DPI is that governments have been doing digital transformation for several decades now, right? This thing is not new. I think a litmus test for us when it comes to DPI is that we feel like if done well, it needs to unlock exponential societal outcomes. And that essentially, that function happens because akin to how in the physical world you have roads, railways, and so on, in the digital world you have open text standards and that are usually applied around typically payments, ID systems, e-signatures, and beyond. And that combined with your ability to get the private sector to innovate on top of these sort of public rails that have been built unlocks exponential societal outcomes. And this is not new. I mean, and then on the next page, you will see that in India, UPI, which is a digital payments rail, is sort of doing 20 billion transactions a month, right? 20 billion transactions a month. I think it is probably the largest sort of payment mechanism globally in terms of volumes overall. And it has happened because at the heart of it is those sort of rails that are truly open architecture, right? So any bank, you can send any money from any bank account, any store of value through any app, essentially. So you could use a sort of a UI app that sort of works for you, whichever UI you likes, through a bank that sort of, or a financial or mobile money player or a wallet, and through any means, right? You can do it digitally, you can do it over voice, you can do it through your sort of thumbprint, for instance. So it allows this any-to-any optionality because of how it's architected. On the next page, you will see another example, which is in the finance space. This is again an India example where essentially, while you have the rails to actually send money, a lot of the richness actually lives in sort of people's financial data, right? So UPI allows you to do accept business payments that are many small transactions that create sort of history and so on. Much of this is also applicable for agriculture. So how do you actually ensure that data gets transferred between financial information providers and financial information users, right? So how do you actually set that sort of rails overall? Again, at the heart of this is an open architecture rail, which is with a consent manager in the middle, where if there's set standards, set schemas essentially put in place, every financial information provider and user sort of come on board and accept these standards and agree to actually share, which unlocks several use cases for citizens. And now in India, we have seen the rise of small ticket lending significantly over the last 4 or 5 years. These are two examples from India primarily, but this is not an India-only story. Pix in Brazil is the same thing. Prompt Pay in Thailand is the same thing. SingPass in Singapore is the same thing. DIA in Ukraine is the same thing, right? So if you look at sort of example after example, if you are able to provide open architecture, open standards, it works. And so bringing this home to agriculture. So if you go to the next tab, I think the key thing that you will see, maybe we move to the next page, is that the exponential unlock actually comes through driving interoperability at the heart of the architecture, which is where a lot of these open standards, open schemas, architectures actually start to come into play. And number two, innovation by other players. I think both of those things are quite important, right? So it needs to be open because different people, these systems need to talk to each other. No one wants their data to sit in a silo, but you also want other people to use that data and do something meaningful with that. And that other people typically needs to be the private sector, right? So whatever system we design, whatever pilot we design, and so on, we highly encourage that the rails be owned by the public sector and the innovation be done by the private sector, which is where I think the DPI philosophy truly comes to life. And how do you do that essentially? Like I've been already talking about, open standards and open APIs. In the agriculture space, in the next on the next slide, the way I would think about this is that there are 3 prongs to scalable data sharing. We have to avoid centralization. We have to get the broader ecosystem to buy in. You could do it through 3 ways. Some of this may be already something that you're working on, but the other bit might be new. So the first one is sort of what we call real-time information exchange, right? So granular, extensive sort of personal transaction data, right? It could be personal or transaction data, for instance, that needs to be. So for instance, market prices is a good example of that, or a sort of a beneficiary database, for instance, is another example of that, right? The second one is what we call verifiable credentials. Here, and I'll talk a little bit about this a little bit more in the following pages. Like if you think of any certificate, any database, essentially, can you actually give that back to the user? So the user becomes the data exchange mechanism, right? Because, and I was talking about this with some folks previously. Like today, the most commonly used data exchange rail in the world is probably WhatsApp, because users are actually sharing their data on WhatsApp, right? So, but that data cannot be trusted because we don't know if it's actually tamper-proof, who actually issued that, and so on and so forth. Is it forged, and so on. But credentials allow you to actually cryptographically sign it, make them tamper-proof, and make that high trust. So that, I think, becomes the second mechanism, which people often don't think of. So the first one is your API-based sort of personal database sharing, which is sort of the open finance example that I share. The second one is user-based, user-driven data sharing. You use cryptographically to sign each document, add a QR code, and make that work. And the third one is open data sets, which is aggregated data sets. Again, this is weather data, soil data, plant health data sets. And again, I feel like everyone in this room would already know a lot about this. On the next page, I wanted to give you an example, just one more thing on verifiable credentials. The way we say this is that any paper or any certificate today that the farmer has, be it a land record, be it sort of livestock ownership, be it their soil health card, be it a fertilizer receipt, be it a subsidy receipt, be it an ID, anything that can be converted into a verifiable credential. You need to add a signed QR on who the issuer is and what does that sort of certificate actually contain. And that basically makes it machine readable. You can then, because it's digitally signed, it becomes tamper-proof, right? And then it could be issued to any inbox, as we say it. It could still be a paper with a PDF. So imagine the mock-up that I've done is, imagine a farmer who has a soil health card and is now eligible for certain fertilizer distribution, for instance. Now, his or her eligibility can be determined by scanning that QR code to actually see is that soil test actually valid, is it actually tampered, or is it actually real or not, right? Because it becomes machine readable. But the farmer does not need to have a smartphone. The farmer still has that piece of paper, but the paper becomes high trust. Right? So that's a simple example. But in this case, the farmer is actually doing data sharing, right? So farmer becomes the sort of the means. On the next page, I think the other bit that I think quite important is that there are tons and tons of registries that are sitting in government departments after government departments. Again, where are the warehouses? Where are the fertilizer shops? What pesticide, et cetera, right? Who are the beneficiaries? Where are water pumps? Where are solar water distributors, and so on and so forth. Each of those registry can be converted into reusable infrastructure if we open them up through APIs for the private sector and for the other ecosystem to use. So essentially, that bit that I was talking about upfront, that we have to make these things interoperable, but in addition to that, we have to allow for innovation to be done on top of that, right? So someone has to use it. Otherwise, the data is for data's sake. And that, I think, becomes the sort of the core. So two things I would leave you with. In your work, if there is a registry, open that up. If there is sort of any data, give that back to the user with sort of credentials. And what that allows you to do is that if each database starts to become open and starts to follow a certain standard and schema, then the whole department becomes sort of open in some sense. That sort of sets the entire sort of country to become that. And then multiple countries can also exchange that, right? So instead of driving it top down, you can also drive this bottom up. And which is sort of the approach that we try and take, which is to say, hey, yes, we have agreed on some of these system standards and so on. Let's actually start building, start with one or two. Once they see value, and then others will follow, right? Success breeds success. So with that, I'll pause.
Great. Thank you very much, Vinit. So just for the others, if you have any questions or anything you would like to ask Vinit, Vinit will have to leave us a little bit earlier today. But so maybe, Vinit, you said you've talked about how you've been implementing in other countries. Just as a quick follow-up, how difficult has it been to implement this model that CDPI has been promoting in other countries?
I would say that it's a good question. I think it really depends on who the champion is on the other side. So if you have a champion who's actually willing to do something and make things happen, I think we can say for sure that technology is probably not the bottleneck. So we can work with them to figure out what's the right model and architecture is. But I think making that happen in the country becomes obviously challenging for several reasons, right? Because of legacy systems, incentives, and so on. So we need someone who's like really wanting to see this happen. And if you find that person, I think it will be challenging, but we can make that happen.
Okay. So you talked about that someone to drive, to champion it, to drive it, but also someone who can bring collaboration amongst the parties, isn't it? In the other
100%.
countries.
And that's where I think the reusability comes through, right? Like unless you can actually bring other parties to the table, so this will not go anywhere, right? Then it just becomes another sort of tech initiative rather than becoming a DPI truly in its true sense.
Okay. All right. I don't see any questions coming up other than a request from Felicia asking how does this DPI concept applies to the fisheries or aquaculture sector? Okay, I've got Ben, you've got your hands up, maybe.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Quick question for Vinit before he leaves. I picked something from what you said, which we are struggling with NAgDI, that the rail owned by the public sector and the private sector innovators come and build on it. So the National Agricultural Data Infrastructure, we are seeing the data as the value, right? Not the technology per se, the data. So that's where the ownership of that comes, So I'm not sure whether the ownership of the technology will be different from the ownership of the data. Because if we say the public sector should own the data, then there's going to be a big problem. Any quick reaction?
Yeah, I think great question. I would say that the core principle, DPI principle, is that the architecture needs to be federated. So we don't push for data centralization and ownership with a single entity at all. All of these systems need to sit with the individual ministries or departments, right? So for instance, like even if you think of just a simple fertilizer subsidy distribution problem, right? Like if that fertilizer distribution dealer network data sits at a centralized place, then who updates the data? Right? Like every time a dealer gets updated or moved from the original fertilizer department, that they have to make a change in that department, right? So we don't want that sort of extra mess. So the data needs to sit with the original department. You just need to have the rails to fetch that data or create a credential essentially out of that data. So that's definitely, I think, a core architecture principle. And Christian, if I can respond quickly to the fisheries aquaculture one. Thank you for that question. And I think it's not a straightforward one because I think, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think it's been applied. But I think some of the foundational concepts of, say, if there's a farmer practicing aquaculture, you would need some version of a farmer ID. You would need some version of the GIS coordinates essentially that can actually be given back to them, right? So the question that I would question that I would often ask is like, what part of serving that farmer or aquaculture player is actually currently high transaction and needs to be done again and again? And if there is value in that being owned by the public system, then we can think of that becoming a rail. So maybe we can have a longer chat about it. But some of the foundational blocks, like I said, this ID systems like payment rails, your ability to actually get credit, your ability to get social benefits, all of those things are applicable for any agri space and beyond.
Great. Thank you very much, Vinit, for setting the scene and sharing these insights with us. I think you've also left us with some food for thought, which is good as we go through the rest of the session. As you had explained, you might have to leave us in the middle of the webinar. So thank you again for being with us and for sharing these insights, which we will share the slides with the audience early next week. Great. So if I can now move to the next speaker. So maybe just a comment. We've heard a lot about the use of registries. And here we've talked about Vinit has talked about the context of registries at a national level. But then, what happens in the case of your country where there is no national registry set up already? How do you now engage with this whole process? The advantages that DPI offers you. And our next speaker, Gabriel Sonyama, will be able to propose to you some of the solutions he's come up with as the co-founder and CEO of ChromePay, where they've promoted this concept of your digital ID as a service. And Gabriel, you can talk a bit more about that, where I believe you can now use your system to authenticate who you are yourself in any transactions, just like Vinit was talking about. Over to you, Gabriel.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen.
We can't hear you well. You need to. Sound is a bit muffled.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'll just start by sharing my screen. 1 second.
It's still very low.
Can you hear me now?
Come a bit closer, maybe, to the microphone. Yeah. Sorry.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Is it clear?
It is a bit better now. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So let me just share my screen. 1 second. Perfect. My screen clear?
Yes, it's coming.
Great. So thank you everyone for having me here today. My name is Gabriel Sonyama. I am the co-founder and CEO of Zimbabwe of ChromePay. I'm originally from Zimbabwe, of course. And basically at ChromePay, what we do is we focus on bridging unbanked communities that don't have access to trusted credentials, and we bridge them basically with digital financial services as well as other agricultural services as well. And to date, we actually mainly focus on providing our services within the East African region, particularly within Ethiopia. So we're looking back at our experience and basically, the work we've done to date. one of the main things which we've basically been noticing and focusing on is basically breaking silos to interoperability. And when we look at the market which we're operating today, we have basically three different segments. We have what we call cooperatives and unions. And basically, most small-scale farmers access their services today through these cooperatives and through unions, where they're able to gain loans, they're able to gain saving services, tap into agricultural inputs, as well as sell off their seasonal yields back to the cooperatives. Then we also have the MFIs, microfinance institutions, which are also providing other transactional services, of course, as well as insurance. And then at the highest level, we have different basically regional government agencies which provide different types of support for these farmers, but also have other verifiable information. But one of the key challenges is that most of this information is actually collected manually through manual registries, whether it's at the cooperative level, MFI level, or even government level, pretty much, right? So every transaction is basically written in a manual ledger. Information about the farmer is written in a manual ledger, and basically this information becomes, not really trustworthy. First of all. Secondly, it actually becomes much more difficult to basically share that data to actually bring in more services, right? Or even increase the type of services that these farmers may need to access through these different channels. So for instance, I'll explain. Let's just say if we're looking at a cooperative, there's a cooperative that provides lending, and there's a cooperative that basically provides inputs. But sometimes the farmer will go to this cooperative to apply for a loan, then use that loan basically to purchase the inputs from another cooperative. But because there's no actual collaboration between these two cooperatives, usually the farmers will get rejected because maybe there can be a higher risk, right? Maybe of defaulting and so on. So basically, companies like us, such as ChromePay, what we're working on doing is now basically creating a trusted form of authenticating, verifying this data and turn it into trusted, verifiable data, where we digitize it by adding credible data points, not just obviously just the transaction itself, but like such as about any other information such as your biometric data, geolocations, signatures, and all this. What ends up happening is that this information becomes much more trustworthy, and different ecosystem players are able to start actually trust it, and then we can start opening up that gateway, that rail for interoperability, where we start seeing that, and when we open that gateway for interoperability, we start seeing that there's reduced, obviously, risk for fraud, where these service providers are able to trust you more as a farmer to provide you more services, right? Because they're all participating in data sharing and can see that this information is being validated and aggregated into your unique digital farmer ID per se. Secondly, you are also able to streamline this information and start creating things such as a credit reputation, right? So now, before maybe I had transactions for purchasing inputs at this cooperative, and then I had my insurance transactions at this MFI, and then I had my loans and my savings at this cooperative and this other cooperative as well. But when you aggregate all this information and basically unify it into one unique ID for this farmer, he's able basically to leverage that into a trusted score, right? Into a trusted reputation, where he can start leveraging that as a credit score and start actually tapping into different credit facilities, etc. And then obviously another level is basically automating. What happens is a lot of these farmers are also access government services through their cooperatives. So for instance, the cooperative agencies I was mentioning before, the regional agencies, will distribute fertilizers, they'll distribute seeds for free or maybe at a very discounted rate for these farmers, but it's also still through these cooperatives and through these unions. So when this happens, basically, when all this information is digitized and streamlined, we're also able basically now to automate the reporting functions, where the cooperative agencies and so on and the government agencies are able to receive real-time updates and actually start putting more resources into distributing more and more aid and support for these farmers as well. And I think the last important thing, which is very important, is actually strengthening and empowering that farmer. Because yes, this information is spread across different sectors, right? Like we said, the cooperatives, the MFI, the governments. But at the end of the day, when you treat into that one unique ID and it's now digitized, that farmer now has full control and ownership on that of that information, where he can seamlessly share it and have full control over it. So now we're looking at decentralization, right? We see mainly three main pillars, and those pillars mainly focus on ownership, right? Where we see the farmers, the cooperatives, all the participants are retaining the data, but seamlessly sharing it within the network. Secondly, is obviously transparency of the transactions themselves. We've broken down that barrier, right? So we're not having transactions segmented within each area, but now as a service provider, I can see anything that's happening within the ecosystem and can make more credible, informative decisions as well across various stakeholders. And lastly is scalability. And what I mean by this is not depending on one sole provider to be a validator of information, but each ecosystem player, whether it's the cooperatives, the financial institutions, the MFIs, or the banks, they're all playing that role in validating the information that they have. For instance, I think in the previous presentation, they mentioned that, oh, we cannot validate the information on WhatsApp and so on because there's no credible way of actually telling if that information is real or not. But when you have a credible provider such as the cooperative being able to validate that loan transaction or the savings transaction, and then you have the cooperative agencies being able to validate the personal information such as the biometric data, who the farmer is, their land certificate, and then you have the micro MFIs also being able to validate all the other transaction information. What ends up happening is there ends up not being a point of failure, right? There's no dependency on one organization to validate all this information, and basically becomes basically a network effect of an open data ecosystem, where we have reliance on everyone who's playing their key role, which then leads to the main impact of this. And the main, I think, from our side, from what we've seen, the main things in terms of what has been enabled is traceability and trust, right? When you have traceability and trust, not only can those ecosystem players trust each other, but other third parties can start coming in, such as the banks, such as the off-takers that want to actually purchase inputs and export them to other countries and so on and interact with these farmers. We are creating room for collaboration between different players as well. And lastly, increasing access to support and resources for these farmers as well, not just from the private sector, but from the public sector. As I mentioned before, these government organizations are actually leveraging these networks of cooperatives, institutions to distribute the resources to farmers. But sometimes it may be hard for them to trust if these resources are actually reaching the farmers, right? What we mean by this is, sometimes you could create ghost farmers or ghost transactions and so on, and maybe the agencies may not want to allocate a higher amount of maybe seeds or fertilizer or funding provided to these farmers because they may think something sketchy is happening at the bottom. But when there's actually traceability, they can see that each transaction is actually validated. This farmer is real, so they say they are, this information is what it is. They're able to allocate more resources to the farmer at the last mile itself. So that's pretty much it in terms of the current ecosystem, or what we've learned today, and what CronePay is doing within the markets we're operating today. Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Gabriel. I don't see any questions in there. You got some applause from the audience. So, okay, maybe I don't think we'll take the questions now. We'll before we move to the next one, I see you've thrown in a lot of words here: credentials, ownership, trust, digital empowerment, scalability. These are key terms that probably mean a lot in the context of understanding how this all comes together. I hope the audience is able to make sense of it, but otherwise, if you had more time, we would probably go deeper into these kinds of topics, how they're related to each other. But this is what we will be doing as we go through the e-conversations that will be happening as from, they've been happening all week, continuing next week as well. These are the topics we can bring up as well. But thank you, Gabriel, for this. It's interesting. I can see the relationship with the credentials that Vinny talked about. And it seems that, once you start with something that is trustworthy, you can build on a lot of these in this digital world. So now we'll move to another level of understanding of the implications of data exchange. And we'll welcome Peter Wartzman, who is partner at the European Food and Farming Partnerships. He will explain what it is all about. But I had an interesting thing I picked up from the strap line I picked up from the website, which was about the strategy, a model for change, strategy, sourcing, sustainability. So with these, Peter, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Krishan. So I think just the first thing I'll do is just introduce European Food and Farming Partnerships, what it is, what we do. So we're an agri-food supply chain consultancy, really specializing on those supply chain relationships and strategic sourcing. And really our focus is helping our clients build more resiliency, sustainability, and profitability is a key part of that. And we kind of have two parts of our business. So one is more focused on strategy, change, market research, and then the other is focused on really building supply chain collaboration, which is exactly linked to this digital public infrastructure work, where you have typically a food business who wants to have wants to drive more change, wants to build resilience on the farms that they source from. And the only way they can do that is A, if they know who those farmers are, and B, manage a relationship with them, even though they don't have a direct contract with those farmers. So how do you manage all that complexity? So from that perspective, that's what I thought I'd share here. And the name does say European Food and Farming Partnerships, but personally I have a background working in things like cacao, coffee, tea. I was the hot beverages buyer for Tesco, and have worked in those places on plantations as well. So I only have one slide, and really what my goal is today is to help bring to life some of the factors affecting data availability, accuracy, and access along food supply chain, to really go into the perspective of the different actors of both about creating, collecting, and sharing data, as well as using and paying for data. So I'm focusing more on the sustainability aspect of things, just because that's driving a lot of the traceability requirements that we're seeing. And that's why on the left I have sort of the economic element of that, the social element of that, the environmental element of that. And if we start with, say, purpose, so why are these downstream actors, so the retailers, the food businesses, manufacturers, asking for more data? Well, one of them is one of the big drivers is sustainability Scope 3 targets, and when people talk about getting sustainability data, well, there's one is getting the baseline of where we are today, and two is making improvements. And if you just deal with regional or general data sets, it's really hard to do anything. It's really hard to make improvements. Whereas if you want to make improvements and measure those improvements,
Peter, you forgot to share your slide.
Oh, am I not sharing my slide?
No, we're not seeing it.
What are you?
We can see you. I can see you, but I can't see your slide.
Okay, I thank you for pointing that out. Let me.
Because you did say you had only one slide, so we thought, okay, it's coming. But
how about now?
Yep. Okay. Good. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for pointing that out. Apologies. So on the top I just have here's the food supply chain, and then as the elements of sustainability they talked about, and I'm just going to go through the reasons here. And so the purpose of sustainability data, it's different in every area and for every player. So if you look at taking the input suppliers, what I'll do with them is, so the Bayers, the Bayers of the world, the Syngentas of the world, supplying crop protection, seeds, fertilizers, etc. For them, actually, they have relationships with farmers and distribution companies, and they get lots of data. And what they see the future for a lot of them is how to use that big data to give better advice for those farmers. But farmers have to see a benefit in it for them to share that data, and that's where we get into the power and commercial dynamics and the trust. And then if I get into things like you know, the retailers, why do they care about data? They're trying to hit their scope 3 targets. They're trying to make sure they're able to source from certain regions in the future to make sure they have an ongoing business. But what's happening is the retailers are asking the manufacturers to say, okay, can you give me this carbon data, this water data, this biodiversity data? And if they don't have the traceability on what farms or fisheries these things are coming from, it's really hard. And then you have the challenge of all these different, you know, this ability to validate and verify. One of the big challenges there is you have competing measurement systems. So, you know, you have the TCFD, you have different carbon measurement systems can have a different output of how much the carbon emissions are from, say, a kilogram of beef from a given farm, because you've measured it in a different way than, say, your competitor. And this makes it really difficult to amalgamate data and have things comparable. And then if I kind of move into things like cost benefit, so you got to really ask yourself, well, who benefits? What's the purpose of all these of sharing this data? So for many farmers, there's a real challenge. They typically don't have a lot of resource, they don't have a lot of time, and they're asked for more and more data about their soil, their production, their water, their pesticide use, etc. And they're not, and historically they haven't seen enough benefit back for sharing that data. So how do we use this digital public infrastructure to make it easier to give them value back? And then that builds the relationship, that can build trust, and then that data can flow through. In things like processors, where you have things like wheat, where you have wheat coming from loads of farms, then it's processed together by millers, and then once that flour comes out on the other end, you have no traceability which farms a specific bag of flour came from. It might have come from thousands of farms. So in the short term, we're looking at mass balance, and in the longer term, where there's a real goal to say is how do I know exactly what farms this came from? And that's where you need, you know, so there's some challenges and opportunities there. Gabrielle talked about you know, using financial flows to verify sourcing and where things came from. So how do I know that how much fertilizer did I use? Did these cocoa pods actually come for cocoa beans come from this farm in Ghana? That's I think a real opportunity is to combine those kind of financial transactions with the physical flows of the good. Then we're talking about power dynamics.
Can you wrap up in 1 minute, please, Peter?
Yeah,
sorry to rush you. Yeah.
No, it's fine. That's fine. So then we're talking about power dynamics. So especially with across the supply chain, there's there's not only the typical power dynamics between, you know, buyers and farmers, who are those logistics traders who show up at their farm, but it's also the you know, from the processors, who are often worried, well, if I connect my manufacturer to where my farmers are, we might get cut out of the deal. So it's just understanding some of those things and taking those sensitivities into account when being able to build the data flows. And lastly is trust. I think that a big piece here is about investing in the relationships. So for instance, farmers are only going to provide good quality data if they trust it and they see a benefit. There's lots of examples where farmers are forced to put information in, and they do, but you can't trust it. And so that's a whole piece to say, look, if we really want to get the value out of the data, we got to really think carefully about the relationships and invest in that flows. So that's it for me.
Great, thank you very much, Peter. For me, there are so many elements that you've kind of described there that I think probably deserves to be discussed more in detail. So maybe the audience, if you found this interesting and you'd like to hear more, just put in some comments so that we know that maybe in the future we should get Peter to come back and go into more details, because I can see you were describing all the requirements on one side, the demands from the consumers or the ones who are marketing, but at the same time, the pressure on the farmers to provide data, but then without any motivation to keep on doing it. So, or they're doing it reluctantly, and it may not be trustworthy. So I think these are all issues that maybe we can bring up in a future interaction. But maybe, so Peter, if you're willing, we'll try to bring you back for some more conversations with this audience, and especially if they do ask for it. I think it's good that they express themselves here. So we've got about less than 10 minutes left for the hour, and we have our next speaker, Tommaso Ceccarelli, who is the coordinator of the Digital Agri Hub, hosted at the University of Wageningen, one of our technical partners here, with whom we've been organizing this series of webinars and the e-conversations. So Tommaso has just come back from a trip in the Caribbean where he was looking at the whole aspect of agricultural knowledge and innovation systems in the context of what the whole world is talking about, this agri-food systems transformation. So Tommaso, maybe we're now asking you to take a much bigger perspective of how does DPI now support this process of agri-food systems transformation from a systemic level or an ecosystem level. Thank you. Over to you.
Wow, what a responsibility. Thank you, Christian. So yeah, indeed. So we are having this, getting now to this broader look, and the keyword here is food system and food system transformation. So this is a concept which well, it's not new. It has emerged, I would say, starting from in a way from the Food System Summit in 2021, where countries have been discussing pathways towards achieving SDGs, and they have taken this perspective of the food systems as a complexity and multiplicity of stakeholders and activities and goals and processes towards of course objectives of which are underlying the SDGs. So you know them. I don't have to go into the details there, of course, but of course, interconnected challenges of health, environment, economic sustainability, but also equity in there. So, okay, we want to make things pretty complicated, because the reality is, and then this can be guiding us, hopefully, through, say, a framework, through establishing a framework which, would help us in understanding what is the role for particularly for, of course, the DPIs and digital altogether. I don't know if my slide is visible or not yet.
Not yet in the presentation mode, but
not in the presentation mode.
Yeah.
Yeah, is it now?
Excellent. Good.
Okay, so this was done for another purpose, actually. It's a SOFA report of the FAO, the State and Food Agriculture report, done in 2022. That was about leveraging automation in agriculture for transforming agri-food systems. So I'm taking this because it's in a way a good visual to portray what we may all know, that the fact that there are a multiplicity of and diversity of actors on the one hand side, and then there are upstream, midstream, downstream processes across the food systems, and which go from production, from procurement of inputs, delivery of inputs, up to the, of course, the consumption, distribution and consumption. So for each of these trajectories, we do have data. We do have actually the option, the possibility, the potential of using data, of managing and processing data, of gaining in this way efficiency across supply chains, value chains altogether. And all this, I mean, I think there is enough evidence from studies that all this is effectively supported by digital solutions, and that altogether we should go that way. The point is, then I think I want to make two considerations there. One is this ocean of options, of digital options, required a bit of kind of objective evidence coming out from trusted bodies and organizations who could say, which tool would work better in which of these nodes and for which of these actors, to do the job. So that brings about the aspect of knowledge brokers, which are trusted, as I said, neutral. And here I do a bit of advertisement for the Digital Agri-Hub, which is as you said, Christian, is the platform that we are running with over a bit less than 1,500 solutions now for low, medium income countries, where we're trying to also gain more and more, enrich more and more the information in a way which is actually provided by the same service providers. And we also try to, of course, not to certify, but to do some quality control over that quality. So on the one hand side, making a bit of order in this big arena of digital solutions coming in, but also clearly the need for DPIs, for digital and public infrastructure, to build the building blocks, to create the building blocks which these solution needs to do a quality job, to do a job which is trusted, and to do a job which is fit for purpose at the end of the day. So that's the philosophy of federated system, which do not, which break the logic of the siloed actions, is the end point, I think, in this kind of consideration. We really need to find from different levels, and especially for the agricultural sectors, which have such a variety of data to handle, standards, interoperability standards from the technical point of view, from the legal point of view, from the semantic point of view, which are in place, and also joint collaborative effort to invest in creating data sets which are of quality and of use. So I don't know if this was an answer to your first point, but this is what so far it came to my mind.
It's good. Thank you, Thomas. So yeah, it's good for sharing. Well, thanks for sharing all that. Well, basically you're sharing what was going on in your mind, but how do we deal with the complexity of the numbers of actors in there and the demands and for data that we need to be able to satisfy? So, I think, and we haven't got much time left in this webinar. So I think I'm trying to see what did we manage to do today is that we saw how the principles of DPI is that we are able to break, as you said, break down the silos from databases. But when we start using registries, we are able to connect the siloed data amongst themselves, which opens up the room for collaboration. We saw from what Gabriel presented was the way you can empower an individual to become part of that ecosystem, the digital ecosystem, to create these credentials that they can manage themselves and decide who else they can share it with and for what purpose. And what we saw from Peter's presentation is that there's a whole lot of actors as well that we don't tend to talk about when we're looking at production agriculture only, but we forget about all the people involved in along the supply chain that also need information, and especially now the requirement for traceability. A lot of African countries are now dealing with the EU DR regulation, deforestation regulation, where they have to report back on the sources of the production before they can export products to the EU. And what you presented, Tommaso, was this whole ecosystem of all the actors again. And as your slide had shown, the concern people have about what will be the impact of automation on labor in the agricultural sector. But again, all this depends on the availability and accessibility of data at all the different stages. Perhaps then we can better automate, but at the same time, we also need the data to be able to understand better where we are, what are the opportunities for automation, where are the opportunities for applying these solutions. You said it's about 1,450 digital solutions already, repertorié in French, listed on in the Digital Agri Hub knowledge base. So yeah, and all these eventually can be connected, and through this kind of interoperability that the DPI can offer. Now, this is the conversation that we've been wanting to have. So Ben has been leading this program at the Commonwealth Secretariat on this concept of the National Agricultural Data Infrastructure. So next week we'll be presenting a bit more about the basis of this conceptualization of what we're calling the NAgDI, but based on these kinds of reasonings and arguments for increased use or integration of our data and exchange of data. So I see that quite a few people expressed an interest for Peter to get more information about the things you were talking about. So maybe we'll consider in this community whether we can have another session, looking at the whole supply chain, the request for data along the supply chain. I think the issue of EUDI is also something that we'll be looking at together with our colleagues from GIZ, the DIASCA program. Now, let me see. I need to close this meeting very soon, but let me just invite everyone else who has been attended the webinar. If you want to continue with the conversation, we've been having these conversations which kicked off last Monday and is ongoing. So please do use this QR. Well, if you have your phone in your hand, you can scan the QR code to join the conversations, and we'll be having a new topic or a new set of questions starting on Monday next week. But the conversations are there, and it's through an email-based system, and the conversations are there. You can also go back to see what else we've been talking about in the last week. I will be trying to make a summary of the discussions from the previous week. And then, so we had the invitation to the webinar for next week, and with this invitation for you to join this. Let me see if I can just quickly paste in the code. Actually, we have these two things. I'll put it in the chat. There you go. So the link to the webinar, and then the link to join our conversations. So yeah, as usual, 1 hour goes by very fast, and so I'd like to maybe well, thank all our speakers today, our presenters. Sorry for rushing you through the process. And yeah, so I think, well, what can I say? I saw Tommaso was still there. I thought maybe my connection was off. No, it's fine. So yeah, so thank you again to the speakers for their interesting insights. I've tried to summarize what I thought we've been able to cover today. And yeah, so next week we'll try to build on these conversations and then take it further into how we see these whole concepts become applicable and being applied in the field of agriculture. So with this, on behalf of Ben, who had to leave us early, and myself, thank you again to all the participants. And since we have a bit more time, just to thank the invisible hands behind the scene. There's Indar, there's Kudzi, and there's Giacomo. Tommaso as well has been, supervising some of the work, but also, these are people we don't hear about, but those who are the speakers know how much work goes on behind the scene for these kinds of interactions. So thank you, everyone, and please, by all means, join us for the e-conversations, and we'll see you again next Friday, same time, 1300 GMT, for the next round of interactions. All right, have a nice evening, or have a nice rest of the day for those